Hey, Marshall here to tell you about an incredibly easy way anyone who loves brewing and drinking beer can save a little bit of money. In addition to supporting everything we do here at Brewlosophy, the American Homebrewers Association recently introduced their free Brew Guru mobile app. It offers a searchable database of homebrew recipes, including popular craft beer clones and hundreds of award-winning recipes from the National Homebrew Competition. What's more, Brew Guru has a searchable map of deals at breweries, beer bars, and homebrew shops. Grab the free Brew Guru app for iPhone and Android devices today and follow the path to great beer. It's been said that beauty is in the eye of the beer holder, and if that beer is in my hand, beauty is directly related to clarity. I know this probably irks some people, those who have adopted a love for all things hazy, but I can't help these feelings that I feel. I promise it's not the drinker I'm judging, just the way whatever it is they're drinking looks. And while I'm perfectly fine sipping the occasional opaque pint that looks more like a smoothie than beer, there's just something about brightness that makes the world feel right to me. Larger commercial breweries typically rely on mechanical filtration systems to achieve this level of clarity, and while smaller scale versions are available to homebrewers, they can be kind of cumbersome and a pain to use. Is there another way to accomplish this goal? And if so, does it affect beer character in any way? You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and in this episode, contributor Jake Huolihan is with me to talk about the use of gelatin in brewing. Jake, what's up, man?
Hey, like you, I love clear beer, and when I first started homebrewing, my beer, didn't really clear up to the level I liked, so I started looking for, methods to make it clear, and gelatin is pretty much the first hit anytime you look in terms of getting your homebrew clear.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember back in the days when, when I first got started in homebrewing, it was kind of like a badge of honor to have hazy beer, which I thought was funny. And then there seemed to be this move towards a preference for clear beer. And it seems like we're almost moving back, but not necessarily to hazy beer being a badge of honor, but to not worrying too much about the clarity of one's beer, and that the haze is almost more intentional nowadays. And so I don't know if intentional is the right word, but that it's not such a big deal. Back in the day when I got into it, haze meant that there might be an issue with your process, whereas now it seems like it's a function of the process.
Yeah, well, you talk about that badge of honor. Even commercial breweries, a lot of the German and the European ones do market that as unfiltered, unpasteurized,
right.
But you get that beer and it's a lot clearer than most of the hazy homebrew you're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, some of our listeners might recall an article I published a few years back that ended up getting reprinted in Brew Your Own magazine called A Brewer's Thumbprint, which is about an experiment that I did with some local friends where we all brewed the same beer with ingredients that I provided them. The idea being to see if there were any differences just based on our process. So anyways, the beers were all the same, just brewed on our own equipment, whatnot. Well, one of the dudes involved was my good friend Brad Gaines, who's now the brewer at House of Pendragon Brewing Company. He's the assistant brewer down there with Tommy Caprellian. And, when we all got together to compare these beers that we brewed, I think there were 5 of us in that experiment. We all got together, we're tasting these beers, looking at them and comparing them. His was the only one that was just crystal clear. I mean, we all had our beer's clear, but his looked like he had just poured it, out of like a big beer commercial can or something. And so we started, asking him how he was able to do that. And that's when he shared that a part of his process is fining with gelatin. And he explained to us the method that he uses to do that. And that is what ultimately inspired me to start messing around with gelatin. And by messing around, I mean performing some experiments. And in my experience, I've used gelatin hundreds of times at this point. In my experience, it does seem to work for the intended purpose of clearing beer. But of course, there's a lot of questioning as to the impact it has on other beer characteristics. All of that and more in a bit. But real quick, I want to ask y'all, if you enjoy what we're doing here at Brewlosophy, both on the website and at the podcast, please consider sending some support our way. It's really easy to do so. One of the easiest ways to support us is to head over to brewlosophy.com/support, where you'll find a list of links to bookmark and use whenever you do your shopping online. You seriously don't feel a thing. It doesn't change your shopping experience at all. And we get a little bit of love from those those online shops just for referring you. It's super easy. You can bookmark those links, use them whenever you go shopping. I've been told that we're not supposed to say certain humongous online retailers on the show because they don't like that, I guess. So anyways, you get the hint. If you want to get something tangible in return for your support, you can join the nearly 600 patrons of Brewlosophy who have committed to a monthly pledge. Rewards over at Patreon include secret contributor recipes, access to the Brew Crew private forum, unique discounts at Yakima Valley Hops, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A with a very special guest. So far, we've had Michael Tonsmeyer and John Palmer on. They've answered questions for an hour. Like 35, 40 patrons who can make it to this live cast. And they're just sitting there answering questions that are getting tossed at them. It's a lot of fun, very educational. And this later on this month, we've got BJCP Grandmaster Judge Gordon Strong joining us to do the same thing. We've got some other people who are lined up. I've been talking with the folks from Russian River to get Vinny Chilurzo on the live cast for a month. So we've got Charlie Bamforth from the UC Davis Brewing program. He's going to be on to answer questions in the future. All kinds of great stuff. To learn more about the rewards you can get simply for helping us out a little bit and to pledge your support, you can head over to patreon.com/brewlosophy. Another little bonus that patrons get is that they're the first to know of new things that are going on. So like when we released our new shirts at Yakima Valley Hops, they got a heads up before everyone else did. And then another example is just last week, I shot them an email informing them that we have secured our spot for the Brewlosophy karaoke party at HomebrewCon in Portland, Oregon this year. We gave them first crack at securing their spot on the guest list. Perhaps some of you have heard about our haphazardly planned karaoke event at last year's conference in Minneapolis. It ended up being way more fun than imagined. Jake, I know you had a blast singing karaoke that night when we weren't really planning on doing anything.
I did. I cannot wait for this year's. There's just something about being around a group of people and singing some old classics and having a few beers. That's just so much fun.
It's so much fun. People make fun of karaoke. It's like, I think the people who make fun of it think we're doing it to like impress each other. Like, oh yeah, I got the best voice. That is not what karaoke is about. It's about letting loose and just cutting a rug and having fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and none of us definitely have a voice to impress.
Hey, speak for yourself, my friend. That's not... Well, it was so much fun that we decided to make this an annual thing. And like I said, we did just solidify our spot. We're going to be at the Trio Club in Portland, Oregon on the evening of June 28th. That's the first night of HomebrewCon. And we will be heading over, about an hour and a half into the kickoff party. This is not an AHA sanctioned event or anything like that. We were originally planning on just having people donate to help cover costs at the door. We don't really want to charge anything. But then people started saying they wanted to make sure they were on the guest list. So like I said, we gave patrons first crack at that. We got about 25 patrons who have already, given their donations early, which we're doing through PayPal, so that, they can ensure their spot on the guest list. But we've still got about 70 openings left. And so what we're doing now is going public with it. If you are interested in attending the Brewlosophy karaoke party on June 28th, it starts at 9 p.m., goes till 1 in the morning. You can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, to let me know, and I'll get you details on how to make a donation to get your name on the list. This isn't going to be like an all-inclusive thing, but we are going to have a bunch of cans of really easy drinking beer. We'll have appetizers brought in throughout the night. You'll also be able to order whatever you want from the full bar at the club as well. They have a restaurant as well, so you can order food if you get hungry or whatnot. There's a whole stage. It's going to be a blast, man. All of our friends from Yakima Valley Hops, Mecca Great Estate Malt, and Imperial Yeast are joining us. I'm sure there will be some other characters there as well. We'd love to see you, but again, we've only got room for so many people. If you let me know early, we can get your name on the list and figure out how to get you all set. So it's going to be fun. If you're coming in to HomebrewCon, let us know. If you're planning on going to HomebrewCon and you haven't registered yet, make sure to jump on it. You've got about a week to get in on the early bird pricing. I think prices go up like $40 after something like sometime middle of April. So don't forget that you need to be an AHA member to register for HomebrewCon, and that you can sign up at brewlosophy.com/AHA or homebrewersassociation.org. It is honestly the most fun you'll have in homebrewing all year, I promise, and we'd love to see you there. So, all right, feedback this week is brought to you by our friends from Imperial Yeast, who are providing professionals and homebrewers with the finest quality yeast on the market. Packing 200 billion cells into each pitch-right pouch, brewers are ensured a quick and healthy fermentation. We've been using Imperial Yeast for a while now and have nothing but positive experiences with a wide range of ale and lager strains, as well as some funkier stuff. Imperial Yeast is sure to have what you require to turn your wort into delicious beer. Go check out everything Imperial has to offer at imperialyeast.com. Okay, Jake, this bit of feedback comes from somebody. I'm not going to drop the username. Somebody who left a review for us in one of the places that people listen to podcasts, and I felt like they had a good point that we don't really address too often. It was a long review, and I really appreciate the feedback that this person left. And I nipped the review down into a couple of sentences just to kind of pull out the important stuff. So here we go. The person says, the thing I dislike most about this podcast is that it seems there's a great deal of concern for the critics of the content and that there's a lot of backpedaling or tiptoeing around the findings of the experiments. This person goes on to say that they're tuning into the show to learn of a conclusion and can't recall once hearing us ever conclude anything. It seems that we run the experiments, but are afraid to draw conclusions due to our fear of blowback from internet trolls. He goes on to say that more often than not, the questions go unanswered. Jake, I wonder what your thoughts are on this.
I don't really think that we, or at least myself, have fear of critics in terms of drawing conclusions. I think it's more of, kind of the ethos of what we're about. We're about, being unassuming, and there are many ways to make beer. Just because findings show something doesn't necessarily mean that you can draw a conclusion on that in terms of what's going to be best for everybody in every situation. I've certainly drawn conclusions from various experiments, but I'm not going to spout them as things people have to do.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of my take as well. The way I look at it is that I don't mean to get too self-righteous or anything here, but a part of my the motivation to go and start Brewlosophy and do what we've been doing wasn't, a lot of people think we kind of hit the scene just to question convention and all that. And it really wasn't. I mean, I've said it a million times. My original intent was to prove why we need to do these things. And it just so happens that, at least the sensory data doesn't seem to back up a lot of those practices. But one of the things that I look at is, what good do we get out of replacing one conclusion, to use this person's term, with a new conclusion based on a single data point? I mean, these prior conclusions, as it were developed and over time, and with a lot of anecdote behind them, and even some good science to back them up. What good do we get from saying, well, now this is fact, and since we did this one experiment, we can say for sure 100% that you no longer need to mash for 60 minutes, or you no longer need to boil for an hour, or whatever it is. I just don't see the point in that. It's not how I want to approach anything kind of in the realm of science. And I know people hate when we use that term for Brewlosophy, but it's also the way I live my life. I just try to be equivocal as much as possible. Some people call that flip-flopping or whatever, but to me it means that I'm open to changing my mind. I don't feel like I have to get married to these particular ideas, and that gets taken the wrong. It's funny that and you've seen it before, Jake, that like there are people out there who view us the exact opposite as this person commenting, that every time we publish a result, they read it as us saying, we've drawn this conclusion, and here you go. So, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I totally understand what this person's coming to. I think we as humans on a deeply psychological level, we want certainty. We want to feel like, there's an answer out there. And I won't get too deep into the philosophical side of things there, but that's not what Brewlosophy is here for. We're here to tickle your interest, and hopefully get people thinking about beer a little bit more.
Amen,
man. Well, thanks for the comment. I actually really like when people do stuff like that. I engage in a big, long conversation a couple weeks ago on Reddit about our product review process as well. And I think people think that it's easy to assume that when we talk about stuff like that, we're just getting defensive, but not really. I mean, I actually enjoy, talking to people about that because it's a part of the brewlosophy, if you will. So anyways, if you have any show feedback, we'd really appreciate it. You can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com, or, and this is new, you can phone in your feedback by calling 951-444-0320. You can leave us a voicemail, and if your voicemail isn't too terribly vulgar or annoying, we may very well play it on the show and respond that way. Again, that's feedback@brewlosophy.com or 951-444-0320. All right, as my brewing friends are well aware, my beer preferences tend to revolve around styles that are light and crisp, such as Pilsner, Kolsch, and Pale Ale. That said, I do enjoy me a nice big beer from time to time, something to warm me up from the inside out. Well, one of our faithful listeners, Jeremy Barr, sent me a bottle of Troegs Flying Mouflon. I don't remember what year it was. I didn't realize at the time that this is like an annual release for them, but it's a big old barley wine that I felt was only right to share with my buddies.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
Dark? Not dark, but
It's not very dark. It's darker.
cloudy.
Dark and cloudy, kind of like the forecast. Do it.
I can't. Ooh, it does not smell good.
Fancy beer. Whoa, dude.
This is gonna put me back.
Whoa, dude.
This is shoe leather.
I'll just put it this way. I don't even want to take a sip.
I really don't.
I'm kind of scared, man.
Here we go.
You're a brave man, Timmy.
Oh my god,
You almost puked.
it's worse than it smells.
Well, you're not a learned man, and I am, so I'm going to appreciate this beer for what it is, and I'm probably going
Bottoms
to
up,
like it.
Jers.
I'm going to take a big tug.
Do it. It's delicious.
Oh, God.
I'm still tasting it. Soap and it's awful.
Get it off me.
It's not good.
It's in my brain. Oh, God.
Sip 2.
You can do it.
I want nothing to do with this.
This was a trap.
I think he poured all of it together.
We knew he was going to do this eventually. He was going to put something in here that was so terrible. We knew it.
I can't even
I got to get to the bottom of this.
take another swig. Here I go. Oh, there's nothing good about that.
Oh, God. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's awful.
You know what's good about it?
Nothing.
So the good news is over time, you get over the gag reflex.
Do you need to
Oh,
strip the
God.
stain off your cabinets or anything?
No, that's just not good. I'm sorry, whoever made this. Fancy people might like it,
It's awful.
but we don't like it.
Well, I guess it's no surprise that they weren't a big fan. I mean, this was a huge beer. It was very rich. It wasn't one of those beers that taste like beers, you know? But I actually, they've been doing really well. They've been nailing these beer reviews, and then, they didn't like this one, which was a little bit disappointing for me because I thought it was quite delicious, actually. To me, the beer had a very strong toasty note to it with kind of an underlying caramel tone, just like any good barley wine. I'm sure it had a little bit of age on it. I believe it's bourbon barrel aged, in fact. So really rich, flavorful, warm, bready caramel notes, kind of what you'd expect from a well-made barley wine. I liked it. Jake, you ever had Troegs Flying Mouflon? I think I'm saying that right.
No, I haven't. We don't get too many Troegs here in Denver, but I have had their Nugget Nectar, which I thought was quite good.
Yeah. Well, they're doing good things. Troegs is doing good things. Jeremy, thanks for sending that to us. If you have a beer that you've made or that you want to pick up locally to have reviewed by Jersey and Tim, you can reach out to me, Marshall, at brewlosophy.com, and we will get you all set up. All right, we got to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to be getting into all things gelatin and its role in brewing. Shopping for brewing supplies online can be a real hassle, which is why we recommend Love to Brew. They've got great prices, super fast shipping, and they carry exclusive products like East Coast Yeast, the Brewers Essentials brand, and their award-winning beer recipe kits. They're also the only place you can pick up your very own Brewlosophy recipe kit. The numbers don't lie. Love to Brew has hundreds of 5-star reviews, and thousands of brewers are choosing them for their supplies and ingredients each year. Experience the difference at lovetobrew.com. That's love, the number 2, brew.com. When dumping wort-soaked grain in leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, do you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
So gelatin, it's an interesting substance, the history of which I think is quite curious, and particularly involving its use in brewing and beer.
Right. So first off, let's kind of dive into what gelatin is a little bit, in a little bit of the background before we get into how we use it in beer and why we use it. So gelatin is a translucent, colorless, brittle, when dried, flavorless compound, or largely flavorless. I guess that's up for debate. Which is derived from various animal parts. Can be from the hide, the hooves, the bones of a multitude of different animals. It's kind of gross when you look into how it's made and where it comes from. I know it definitely kind of gave me pause when I first learned what it was, but basically it's a collagen type compound, which is a protein which is found in connective tissues and some other animal parts, but when reduced, it forms a gel-like substance, and it comes together and makes some food.
Yeah, it makes a tasty wiggly snack for children. That's for sure.
Yeah. So there's really no I guess set in stone history of when gelatin was first used, but it appears that it was first documented in use in the 15th century in England, and then it was patented in the 18th century in England as well.
Right.
And it seemed to gain widespread popularity in cooking. I believe French cooking uses it a lot, but it has a variety of uses, and really it's super cost effective, so it became very popular.
Right. Yeah, I was reading some history on gelatin. How weird are we that we Googled gelatin's history? But it sounds like basically what happened was, and I'm sure this happened a gazillion times back then, but these 15th century folks were cooking and they were just throwing all the bones and animal parts into a big pot and letting it kind of boil over the fire. And as it would cool off, they would notice the bottom, a layer of kind of a gelatinous stuff on the bottom, and they would go and use that for different things. And that was essentially just the gelatin that was that collagen, extracted from those animal bones.
Yeah, that's disgusting.
Yeah. It sounds disgusting, but dude, we eat meat, and most of us do. I don't mean to diss the people who decide not to, but I think it does. It seems a little bit gross at first, but when you really think about it, it's probably the cleanest part of the. You're just taking the leftovers and boiling it down and kind of pulling this one single thing out of it. But
yeah, it's definitely sanitary too because it's extracted via boiling.
Right.
It's also found a lot of other widespread use from things like cosmetics to pharmaceuticals, a variety of other uses.
Right. Yeah. I know that they use it in vitamins as well as kind of to add some substance to that powdery stuff you're paying a ton of money for to put in your body,
Mm-hmm. But how does this really tie into beer, and why do we use it in beer? Really commercially, it doesn't have a history in beer. gelatin. Until fairly recently, it's been mostly a homebrew, application in terms of brewing that we know of. I'm sure there are some professional brewers out there that use gelatin.
Sure, I've heard of a few who've tried it, and I think the biggest complaint they get, obviously, is the fact that it is made it's a meat product, so a vegetarian and vegans don't like that.
Yeah, and that is a point of contention,
right.
With gelatin, is that these breweries that might be using it might not be labeling their beer as, not vegetarian.
Right.
But collagen, on the other hand, does have a historical use in beer, especially in Great Britain. Isinglass, which is another form of collagen, which is made from the swim bladders of different fish. I believe sturgeon is pretty popular, as well as beluga whales, which might be illegal now, but definitely was historically extracted from them. But it was mainly added to the cask beers. We know that cask beer is super popular in England, and isinglass was added to the cask at the time of filling, shook around a little bit, and then allowed to settle out to produce that crystal clear cask beer that we all know and love. But isinglass, being collagen, functions largely the same as gelatin. So using collagen as a fining solution, does have that historical use in beer. Gelatin, on the other hand, does have some commercial use in the wine and fruit juice industry. I found a few experiments comparing, gelatin labeled as collagen to some other substances in terms of clarifying wine. And one thing that really stuck out to me was that it's thought that gelatin, removes those haze-producing compounds while leaving positive flavor polyphenols, which mechanical filtration or other types of finings would remove, which I thought was kind of funny because, one of the biggest complaints about us using gelatin is that it does strip those flavor positive compounds, that everybody wants in beer.
I mean, and there's a lot of presumption that goes into brewing. We all know that, right? We if it takes out the stuff that causes haze, well, there's got to be good flavor stuff attached to those, haze causing things and whatnot. So I can kind of understand the jumping to conclusions based on observation type of thing. It kind of seems to make sense.
Right, for sure. So how did gelatin really gain prominence in homebrewing? Really, I don't know. I assume that, homebrewers, being the ingenious folks that we are and finding solutions to everything, realized that isinglass was collagen, and gelatin is also collagen, and, started using it, and via various dissemination methods, it became, probably the most popular finding in homebrew.
It does seem to be very popular right now. I dug around and I could not find references to using gelatin as a fining agent prior to, about I think it was like 2007 or 2008. And I don't know who was talking about it before that, or there didn't seem to be like a single source. I believe I saw Sui Generis on that blog. There was a blog post of in 2009 or 10. And that was kind of the earliest I could trace it back, but he talks about folks using it prior to that. I mean, everyone I know is finding their beers with gelatin these days.
Yeah, it's definitely ubiquitous with homebrewing for sure.
For sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about how gelatin works. I think this, I don't want to get too into the mechanics of what gelatin does, but it's an interesting compound when mixed with water. Basically, the solution of gelatin and water becomes positively charged, which attracts negatively charged molecules, including things like yeast and protein. Right. Well, one of the things I thought was curious, and in my research, was that gelatin's positive charge is said to be partially a function of the beer pH, right? So it's more, that positive charge is stronger because the pH of beer, which is around like 4.0 or so, once that gelatin hits that beer, it's almost like the magnetic force strengthens a bit.
Yeah, and going back to isinglass too, in preparing that to add to beer, you do have to add that to an acidic solution. I think a lot of them now come pre-packaged with that solution just being addable to beer. But yeah, you had to add that to an acidic type environment to create that positive charge. I mean, I guess I don't know necessarily. I'm not a chemist how that works, but definitely it does need to be it did need to be acidic,
Right, yeah.
to add to beer and perform that fining function.
I've heard the same. One of the things I was curious about as I was researching how gelatin works in terms of clarifying beer is, and this is maybe a potential experiment, is, I've heard from, I mean, it's not uncommon to see crystal clear beer these days, homebrewed beer these days, and people saying that the reason it looks like that is because of gelatin. I mean, gelatin does clear beer. We know that. However, there are, those instances that you'll read about online or wherever it is on Facebook of people saying, hey, I use gelatin, and they'll outline their process, and it was done exactly how we would recommend they do it, exactly how we've all done it. But the beer just did not clear up. And there are various reasons that can be. But I can't help but wonder to what extent maybe perhaps the pH of their beer just wasn't within the proper range that makes gelatin, more positively charged. Makes me kind of curious to compare we can intentionally make a beer that's like 5.0 pH and compare it to a standard 4.0 pH beer and see if there's a difference in clarity based on that.
That would be interesting, and that might be something we could also easily test out with finished beers. Dose them with something to increase that pH and see if that fining works.
Yeah.
But so gelatin, it's pretty simple in terms of how it works. It's that positively charged ion which attracts negatively charged ions in the beer, forms clumps, and then it forms clumps at colder temperatures, and then gravity just causes them to precipitate out and fall to the bottom, which is different from mechanical filtration, in which the beer goes through, some sort of active carbon or some sort of other type of filter, and compounds are, mechanically taken out of beer. It's said that gelatin and collagen solutions are more effective than certain types of mechanical filtrations, and it seems that commercially finings are used in conjunction with mechanical filtration to really, produce that awesomely clear beer that we see in things like Coors and Miller Lite.
Well, that, and by doing, using some form of chemical filtration like gelatin or the other stuff, we'll mention some other cold side findings as well. What you're doing is you're dropping a lot of that stuff out pre-filter so that your filters last a little bit longer. They don't gunk up as quickly. And I've heard that's relatively common usage in the professional world. One thing I want to say about gelatin, and it was something that I heard about, 3 or 4 years ago, as I started getting into fining with gelatin, is that, there were people out there saying, well, it doesn't work on yeast. It doesn't remove yeast. It just removes like proteins in the beer, or the stuff that causes, chill haze, basically, is what people were saying. But in my experience, what I found is that it does remove yeast. And so I looked into it a little bit. And what I found is that indeed, the cell surface of a yeast cell is negatively charged, though it can be influenced by a number of things, like the particular yeast strain, the amount of oxygen that is contained in that yeast cell, as well as the yeast age. So there might be some truth to this idea that not all yeasts respond the same to gelatin fining, but that the cell surface in general of yeast cells is negatively charged, and that the positively charged gelatin should, in general, attract those yeast cells and coagulate enough to become heavy enough to drop out of beer.
Yeah, it definitely does. One thing the literature will talk about is the fact that dead yeast cells lose that charge. So gelatin or other collagen solutions are not effective at removing dead yeast cells, which I don't know that is necessarily a huge concern on the homebrew scale, but definitely something to remember.
Absolutely.
So why do we use gelatin for clarity? It makes beer clear. Some of the added benefits that people will talk about with clear beer, it's been written about a lot too, is colloidal stability of the beer, which basically, a colloidal solution is a substance of a system of particles, which, being stable means that it's not reacting with each other. So clear beer, the literature will say, tends to last longer because it's not undergoing reactions while it's sitting on that shelf or while it's in cold storage.
Right. Which is sort of funny to me because one of the arguments against gelatin, and any fining for that matter that I've heard at least, and maybe it's not too common, but is that it basically expedites the staling process, because what you're pulling out a solution what usually takes a lot longer to come out of solution, and that basically what you're doing is like quickly aging the beer.
Yeah, it definitely could be. The literature I've read doesn't really support that concern, but on our scale, oxygen is such a concern at packaging.
Yeah.
That maybe adding that gelatin does introduce enough oxygen to rapidly promote those staling reactions.
Right.
So how do we use gelatin? I use gelatin, based on how I learned by reading actually the first experiment we did. But really, gelatin or any other finding should be tailored to the haze load of the beer. On a homebrew scale, that's largely unknown, at the time we're packaging. We brew different things all the time, and we like to operate in round numbers. I know I do.
So do I. I'll tell you what, Matt Del Fiacco doesn't. He sends me the weirdest recipes.
I think you were commenting on one of my recipes that I scaled the other day too.
You guys and your percentages, geez.
So a good rule of thumb with gelatin, or something that we found to be pretty effective, is using between a half teaspoon and teaspoon per 5 gallons of dry gelatin. I don't know what that shakes out to in terms of grams. I've never weighed it out. I've always just used the half teaspoon or full teaspoon.
Yeah, it's anywhere between about 3 and 6 grams of gelatin powder.
Okay, perfect. So that needs to be dissolved in a solution of water. Really, the amount of water should be tailored to how much you're using, but we found between about a quarter cup and a half cup is enough to dissolve that half teaspoon to a full teaspoon and make it into a solution. Then once you've got that solution, generally we heat it up. There are various claims online and from gelatin adherents as to how you go about this process. It does seem to be a contentious sticking point with some people, but we usually heat to about 150. I've heard that boiling is fine. Even in some of the literature testing out gelatin in wine and fruit, the experimenters prepared it via boiling for a few minutes. I don't know, Marshall, have you ever boiled your gelatin and added it?
So I had it must have been 2-3 years ago. I was talking with Nick and Pelletieri from the Yeast Bay, and this topic came up, and I had mentioned to someone, I know, you don't want to boil, of course I was just kind of like regurgitating what somebody else had told me, but you don't want to boil your gelatin solution because you'll denature the collagen or whatever. It's collagen. I mean, Nick was like, that can't happen, dude. You boil. When you're making Jell-O, which is just flavored gelatin, you're boiling it. You're adding that Jell-O to boiled water, and it dissolves faster. It's easier to use. You're sanitizing the thing that it's being boiled in. So there's a lot of good that comes from it. We haven't done any experiments comparing like boiled gelatin versus just heated gelatin, but I have definitely been boiling my gelatin lately, and it seems to be working just fine. So I don't think there's any validity to this claim that you can't boil it.
Right. So the main purpose of heating that once we've got that is to, promote faster dissolving to create that solution and, hopefully pasteurize it or sanitize it a little bit, because we are adding that to finished beer, and we don't really want to introduce any infections at that time.
Exactly.
So once you've got that solution, it's added right away. You don't chill it down. People will say to mix it. I've never really shook the keg when adding it. I don't think it would be an issue. But those corny kegs are, pretty slim.
So you generally fine with gelatin in the keg. I have done the same thing, but I've also I've got a ton of experience fining directly in primary. Another one of the process concerns is when to add the gelatin. Can you add it to warm beer, or should the beer be cool? We've advocated in the past for adding it to beer that's about 50 degrees or cooler, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 10 degrees C or cooler. I've heard from quite a few people who just toss the gelatin into warm beer, keg up their beer, and then toss it into the keezer, and they're seeing great results. So there's a lot to be explored with gelatin, but there are obviously various ways to use it to ensure that you clear up your beer.
Yeah, adding it to a cold solution is probably better, because when beer is cold, any of those haze forming compounds, which are apparent at cold temperatures, come into solution and clump together. So it's, supposedly easier for the gelatin to form that ionic bond and drop out of solution. So once it's added, just wait 24 hours and the magic happens.
Yeah, and it is so magical, isn't it?
It is. If you're if you're finding with gelatin in the fermentation vessel, you just let it sit for 24 hours and then, keg your beer up, trying to avoid disturbing that layer of gelatin at the bottom, which can be quite big, depending on the haze load of the beer.
Oh yeah, and you'll see a difference in the trub layer within 24 hours easily. I mean, it's just crazy what gelatin does.
It works so fast, and it always looks great. I mean, I've added it to like PET carboys before, and just seeing that difference is pretty awesome.
Right.
If you add it to the keg, like I largely do when I use it, those first couple pours after you let it sit for 24 hours will be hazy. Like we said, gelatin does form those ionic bonds, drop out of solution, so it's going to be at the bottom. If you're using a dip tube, which is at the bottom of your keg, it makes sense. You're going to be pulling up all those haze particles with the gelatin for your first couple pours.
Right.
I modify my dip tubes a little bit to try to overcome this. But it's definitely something that you'll notice.
Yeah, something to keep in mind. Well, there seem to be a lot of people using gelatin. Before we head to break, real quick, just to hit on a couple other types of fining agents that come after the boil. One of them is Clarity Firm. I believe Clarity Firm is a White Labs product.
Yeah, so Clarity Firm is a repackaged product called Brewers Clearest. It's an enzyme which breaks down proteins that cause chill haze. White Labs does package it real nice in pitchable, basically 5-gallon doses. You add it at the beginning of fermentation, and it's been shown to produce beers which test under government standards to be labeled as gluten-free.
Yeah,
which is pretty nice.
Yeah, I've had beers that were fine with Clarity Firm, and I've also had like actual gluten-free beers. I'll take the Clarity Firm beers any day.
Yeah, I'm not really a big fan of the sorghum beers.
No, me either. There's also Biofine Clear, which is a colloidal solution of silicic acid and water, which promotes rapid sedimentation of yeast and haze-forming particles. That's another one that I know a lot of professional brewers who use Biofine Clear because both that and Clarity Firm are vegetarian friendly, vegan friendly. Finally, and this is kind of an interesting one. I think it's used more in the wine and juice industry, but PVPP, which I'm not even going to pretend to know how to say what that stands for, but it's a nylon type polymer, which is water soluble. It binds to polyphenols, drops them out without affecting the quality of the beer, arguably. But the weird thing about PVPP is that because it is this plastic, basically, it needs to be filtered out from the beer because it's not rated for consumption. So, but those are three other types of finings that brewers can use to clear up their beer. Again, our focus in this episode is gelatin, and we've done some pretty interesting experiments on that one. We'll get into those as soon as we get back. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Founded in 1978 by brewing pioneer Charlie Papazian, the American Homebrewers Association is a division of the Brewers Association focused specifically on protecting and promoting the hobby of homebrewing. In addition to their work lobbying for the rights of homebrewers across the country, they're also the primary sponsor of Brewlosophy.com. By joining the AHA, not only are you supporting their cause, but you get a ton of benefits as well. Discounts at breweries across the U.S., early access to tickets for events like the Great American Beer Festival, and you get to attend HomebrewCon, the world's biggest gathering of homebrewers. Head over to brewlosophy.com/AHA now to sign up to become a member.
Largely as lovers of clear beer, we were curious as to the effect gelatin has compared to various different types of controls, which in turn led to more experiments as to how gelatin could be used and its effect on various different types of beer.
Right. I was after this experience that I told you about with Brad in our Brewers thumbprint experiment. I was really excited to test this stuff out. To be honest with you, I was solidly in the camp of, the person that I kind of poked fun at earlier. I was the guy who was saying, well, hold on a sec. If you're pulling out all of these things that cause haze, there's good argument to be had that there are flavor and aroma characteristics attached, compounds that are attached to those haze forming molecules. It's got to be different, right? But by pulling that out, you're producing a different beer. So I designed the first experiment. In this one, what I wanted to do was make a standard type of beer that I would normally make, that it would typically come out pretty hazy. And that was an American pale ale. In the vein of my favorite commercial brewery, Firestone Walker, I fermented this rather hoppy pale ale with, I believe it was White Labs 002, the fuller strain. And this was back in 2015. Brewed a 10-gallon batch, split it, hit both with the same amount of hops, the same yeast, all that stuff, fermented them side by side. They were both dry hopped. And then, once fermentation was complete, I cold crashed them, and into one of the carboys, I put this gelatin solution, and then let them sit for, I believe it was, 36 hours or so before kegging them up. They were treated exactly the same in every other respect. The only difference was the gelatin. And after kegging them, I did my normal carbonation process, put them on tap. And I remember before I even started collecting data, just, going in for my little, let's see how finished these beers are, got to make sure they're ready for data collection, pulling a sample off of the gelatin fine one and just being like, what is going on here? How did this thing get so clear? I've never, I've made clear beer before, but this thing was bright. I mean, it was only, I think it'd been on tap for like 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at the pictures from that article, the difference is night and day. And that English strain that you use, the 002, that's a super flocculent strain. So the fact that the control beer didn't really get, it's probably semi-clear, but compared to that gelatin added beer, it's just wow.
I know. It was nuts. And I'd used the fuller strain for pale ale and IPA before. And in my experience, one of the reasons I went with it, besides the fact that I think it makes a great hoppy beer, is that despite how it's high flocculation, when you dry hop beers that are fermented with that strain, the haze seems to stick around. So I thought, what better way to test out this whole theory that gelatin pulls out flavor and aroma compounds. And the thing is, we know that dry hopping produces some haze. And so my thinking was, well, if the haze is caused by the dry hop, which at least some of it I'm assuming was, then if we have a clear beer and a hazy beer, then some of those dry hop, aromatic compounds have to have been pulled out, right? So I felt like it was a decently designed experiment. I ended up serving the beers to 12 tasters. This was back before we were trying to stick with our 20 participant rule here. So 12 tasters, which would require 8 of them to get it right, to identify the odd beer out in order for us to say that there was a significant difference. And in the end, only 5 people Only 5 people were able to identify the unique sample. And of those 5, I asked, I'm hanging out at House of Pendragon serving these beers to tasters. And I'm asking everyone, what do you think was different? Especially the 5 who got it right. Not a single one was able to identify anything particular. They just kind of guessed that, and we all have, you have a 1/3 chance of guessing the unique sample in these triangle tests. And nobody was able to really identify what it was that made the beer different. And what was funny was, in these types of sort of these experiments that have kind of an appearance component, what I'll usually do is take their samples and then pour them into clear glasses. And then just as a joke, kind of ask them like, now which one do you think is different? And the shock on everyone's face when we did that with these beers was pretty interesting. It created a lot of good conversation.
Yeah, I can imagine. I don't know that we've necessarily ever found that a certain haze in beer, has a flavor compound that can be distinguished in our triangle test. But the fact that those beers look so different and tasted, largely the same or not different enough that our panel could distinguish them.
Right.
Was pretty interesting.
Well, yeah. And, appearance is one of those interesting things. I think, perceptually as humans, I think when we see things that are obviously different, we, not intentionally, but we kind of convince ourselves that there is a very real difference. And, in terms of the way they looked, there really was. But the fact that, myself, nor the folks, the participants in this experiment could tell them apart, I thought was really eye-opening. And, of course, since I like clear beer, it just validated, the use of gelatin as a way to accomplish that. And, so I thought it was pretty interesting results.
Right. So, despite a large multitude of homebrewers loving clear beer, which is evidenced by this being, our most popular article of all time, and it continues to be every year.
Yeah.
Some people do, or lately it seems, some people do seem to like haze in beer. Come onto the scene, NEPA.
There you go.
Any IPA. So any IPA is a hazy style New England beer, which is dry hopped during active fermentation. Large percentage of adjuncts such as oats, high calcium chloride. Said to be very hop forward and juicy. So we thought it'd be fun to, test gelatin on this and see if in fact gelatin would strip out some of those flavor positive compounds that everyone's chasing when they're making these hazy type beers.
If ever there were an experiment that ruffled feathers, if people were like, why would you even consider doing that? Little background on this experiment. Our good friend, Ales of the River Ward's Ed Coffey, he's one of him and Brian Hall, in fact, our contributor Brian Hall, are the two guys, along with Michael Tonsmeyer, who I kind of credit as teaching me about New England IPA. They were the ones who were writing about it before it was popular, as far as I can tell. And Ed really just took the helm. He defends hazy IPA, and he's such a good guy, and he makes amazing beer. He's sent me beers before. I've had what he makes. He's an incredible brewer. Well, we decided back for the 2016 Homebrew Con that it would be fun to, we wanted to do an experiment to serve to attendees of Homebrew Con. And so he and I started chatting a little bit, and I wasn't able to take, kegs all the way out to Baltimore. And so Ed, who was going to be driving down from Philadelphia, said that he would brew the experiment for us. So we collaborated on this idea. My contention at the time, with New England IPA being so fresh and so new, was if we can use the methods that we use to get our normal IPA super clear, if we can do that with a New England IPA and it drops clear, and then we can show that people can't taste a difference between the hazy version of New England IPA and the clear version of New England IPA, then we can say that the clarity issue is a moot point, that it's just a desirable appearance issue as opposed to a result of the process of making this style of beer. A lot of pretense. I get it, whatever. But we were interested in this. Ed was interested in it. And so we collaborated on it together. Ed made these New England IPAs. He has a recipe called Hopwards. Go check that recipe out on alesoftheriverwards.com. It is amazing. I've had it a few times now. Absolutely delicious. And so he made these two beers. One of them, they were treated exactly the same. They came from the same batch of wort, all that stuff. One of them he hit up with gelatin using our typical gelatin finding process. Crashed them and took care of those, cooled them all up, carbonated them, and then he racked both into serving kegs and drove them down to Baltimore. Down or up, I'm not sure, but drove them to Baltimore for HomebrewCon 2016, where we collected data on these. I believe there's an episode of Basic Brewing Radio with the James and Steve, where they are participating in this experiment. So, first things first. Jake, you saw the pictures of these beers. Did they look any different to you?
Yeah, I mean, the clarity difference, I think, is apparent, at least in the picture, but the fined beer is definitely not clear. It might be more clear than the unfined version, but it's not what I would call bright, for
not
sure.
At all. I was, you get like, it's like on Christmas when you're like, ooh, I think I know what I'm getting, but I can't wait to open it to prove to myself. I was so convinced that this gelatin fine beer was going to be crystal clear. And what was funny was, I knew the variable, so I didn't count myself as a participant, but I had Ed serve them to me in opaque cups. Just so I could see if I could tell them apart. And then when we poured them into, he didn't tell me what they look like. When we poured them into clear glasses, I was kind of let down, like, oh no, it didn't work, But there was, like you said, Jake, there was kind of a little bit more clarity to the gelatin fine beer. If you kind of looked on the edges, it looked a little bit more clear than the unfined beer. But really, I don't know. I wouldn't even say that just for appearance, the sake of appearance, I wouldn't say that gelatin was really worth it for that style, because it didn't really change it all that much.
Yeah, and that might go back to, like we talked about earlier, proper dosage of findings. The literature always does talk about that in terms of how much finding to use. It's based on your haze load. So maybe that's something we have to experiment with more. Does adding more gelatin to a New England IPA actually clear it up some?
Right. Which actually combines another experiment we're going to talk about here in a bit. But so anyways, we served these beers to 45 participants at the 2016 HomebrewCon. And that would require 21 people to accurately identify the unique sample in order for us to say that they were reliably distinguishable. And in the end, a mere 14 people got it right. 14 people out of 45. That was just, we say it all the time. That blew my mind. I mean, that is, right about 1/3, which is what you'd expect if people were randomly guessing. These beers just did not taste different. They didn't smell different. They didn't mouthfeel different. They were basically the same, with one being slightly clearer, but barely noticeably so.
Yeah, you gotta love those HomebrewCon sample sizes, just because we have so many people and we're able to collect more data. But the fact that 1/3 of the people got this right, which is basically random guessing,
right?
Or we can posit that, it really shows, or at least suggests, that gelatin is not stripping out any sort of flavor positive compounds that people desire in a New England IPA.
Yeah, a New England IPA and the pale ale from above that did drop clear. So really interesting results there. And we've done a few. Those ones were more on the clarifying effects of gelatin and the impact that has on flavor and aroma. We've also done some on some methods. But before we get to those, I want to let you all know about Brewers Hardware, who specialize in tri-clover compatible sanitary fittings, conical fermenters, kettles, and brew stands. Brewers Hardware offers a variety of unique and hard-to-find items for both the home and craft brewing markets, including high-quality stainless fittings at competitive prices with very fast shipping. I've been using their quick clean take-apart ball valves for a few years now. They're awesome, super easy to clean, make cleanup a cinch. Brewers Hardware is also stoked to announce the release of the BCS 482, the newest in brewery automation. To learn more about this and all of the other gear they sell, head over to brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy sent you. You'll receive a free gift when you check out. That's brewershardware.com. So Jake, you mentioned a little bit about this idea of how much gelatin to use is sort of based on how hazy the beer is.
Yeah, and that's really the case with all findings from Whirlflock, Irish Moss, anything. When you look into the literature and the instructions and stuff like that, it's pretty clear that you're supposed to tailor the finding used to your process and to your specific beer. But we're homebrewers. if a little is good, a lot must be better. I mean, you look at some of these New England IPA recipes, and they're dry hopped with a pound of dry hops for 5 gallons.
And people swear that that pound of dry hops has an impact, and I probably would agree with them. But I was inspired to test out this idea of a smaller amount of gelatin versus a lot of gelatin after a conversation I had with our friend John Palmer. He had texted me a couple years ago after reading one of the gelatin finding experiments. I think he was still working on How to Brew, the latest update, but he was asking about what rates we use, how we determined that a half teaspoon, mixed into a quarter cup of hot water worked, and if we'd ever tested out using higher amounts of gelatin. And I hadn't at the point, but so we started chatting about it, and it kind of inspired me to test it out. So I brewed up the same exact beer. It's a Vienna lager that I also entered into NHC. This is going to get me in trouble. It's a Czech amber lager, a European amber lager, and a Märzen. And what I did is I find one batch with, I believe it was the typical half teaspoon mixed into a quarter cup of hot water. And then the other batch, I hit it with 2.5 teaspoons. So about 5 times the amount of the typical. And it was a lot of gelatin. I believe it ended up being just about one little gelatin pack. Mixed it up, did the same thing, treated them both the same. Besides that, dumped them into the cold wort. I had crashed these beers in primary and gelatin fined them in there, and then kegged them together. Once they were kegged up, I carbonated them in my keezer, and then after about a week in the keg, I started pulling samples for myself, and noticed that the batch that was fined with a normal amount of gelatin was exactly what I would expect. It was clear. It's what I'd seen a million times before, and looked beautiful, looked really nice. However, what was interesting to me is that the batch that I find with a whole bunch of gelatin seemed to kind of maintain this haze that just would not drop out, even after like a month or so in the keezer. Kind of a funny observation that I made too, is a little bit gross, was after kegging these beers, my carboys are empty, and there was just this gelatinous glob of stuff in the carboy that was fined with 2.5 teaspoons of gelatin. Pretty nasty. Made me wonder to what extent maybe that being stuck to the side, it trapped the gelatin that would have maybe cleared the beer up a little bit more. I don't know what the reason is, but yeah, appearance wise, the high amount of gelatin did not seem to work as well as the smaller amount of gelatin, the more typically used amount of gelatin.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't. I mean, the pictures bear that out too. Your normal amount it looks commercially clear, while the other one, looks like an unfined homebrew.
Yeah. So the question is, were people able to taste a difference? I served these beers to 19 people, and with a sample size of 19 people, we would need 11 to correctly identify the odd beer out in order for us to say that they were reliably distinguishable. And of course, yet again, only 8 people selected the unique sample. And I'm telling you, those people were not confident in their selections. They picked one, not randomly. I mean, maybe some of them did taste the difference, but not all of them did. For me personally, I recall these beers tasting the same, smelling the same, feeling the same in my mouth. There was no difference with the exception of the way they looked. And because I do care about the way my beer looks, I have to admit that I was a big fan of the beer fined with a normal amount of gelatin.
Yeah, that beer looks really tasty. So I'm trying to think of, what could we take away from this one here? And, maybe it's just that half teaspoon is correct, based on that specific beer, that specific style, and your process. It'd be interesting to test out maybe a smaller amount than 2.5 teaspoons, but still more than a half teaspoon, and see if that. I mean, I don't know how you could get that normal half teaspoon beer any clearer than it is.
Yeah. I mean, maybe run it through a filter after finding it with gelatin, like we were talking about earlier. But yeah, I mean, it looks great. And the one, and it's nice. I sort of like when results say that, hey, you don't need to use as much stuff. You can, save what little cash goes into, buying gelatin anyways. But, it's kind of nice. You just use your regular old small amount and it seems to work fine. Well, another interesting experiment I just want to hit on real quick that has to do with, process aspects of gelatin use. Quite a few people had been asking me, can you just sprinkle gelatin on top of your cold beer as opposed to mixing it up and hydrating it in the hot water? Will that work? So I figured I'd put it to the test. This one I think we did back in December of 2015. In sticking with the similar style as the first gelatin effect that we did, I brewed up an American Pale Ale. This one was fermented with Denny's favorite 1450 from Y yeast, and I don't believe that is a yeast known for being terribly flocculent. Typical type of pale ale. Brewed it up. Both batches were treated exactly the same. After about a day of cold crashing, I sprinkled a half a teaspoon of gelatin on top of the beer of one of the beers, and then the other one received the normal solution, the hot water, all that stuff. And then it was interesting to me. One observation was that the batch in which I sprinkled the gelatin into it, that it wasn't hydrated, the trube layer was much smaller, which indicated to me that perhaps the gelatin wasn't really pulling anything out. As the hydrated gelatin batch definitely had that thick kind of gummy trube layer that I'm used to seeing when I find with gelatin. And then I kegged up those beers, treated them the same, carbonated them, all of that fun stuff. And I took samples after about a week or so, or 5 days, it looks like, in the Keezer, and immediately noticed that the hydrated gelatin beer was noticeably clearer than the beer that was sprinkled with dry gelatin. And then after another week or two, I took samples again, and yet again, the beer that received the hydrated gelatin, like we normally do, the normal process gelatin, much clearer than the beer where the gelatin was added dry.
Yeah, they definitely look different. It seems like, maybe with that dry sprinkled on batch, that the gelatin didn't actually go into solution. We heat it up to partially get it into solution, even though it does do a pretty good job dissolving just in the water, but maybe it just didn't really go into solution and didn't really seem to have the effect that we desire.
Yeah, like it just kind of dropped to the bottom and didn't do what it's supposed to do. So, I served these beers to 18 different participants, which would require 10 of them to get it right for us to say that it was significant. And this one, I was pretty surprised. Only 3 people made the accurate selection, indicating that these beers were, they were basically the same beer with the exception of the way they looked. I couldn't tell these beers apart. They tasted exactly the same. Again, to me, all of this, when I look at the results of this one, assuming that the dry gelatin just kind of dropped out of solution, we can say that this was, close to another gelatin versus no gelatin type of experiment. And yet again, the results seem to support that gelatin is not stripping the beer of aromatic compounds, of flavor compounds, or of anything that's going to affect the way it feels in one's mouth, just based on this sensory analysis.
Yeah, and we're drinking these beers, so quickly compared to like what a commercial beer would go through in the distribution chain, that that colloidal shelf stability just doesn't seem to really be necessarily an issue.
Yeah, well, and so our contributor Ray Found refers to gelatin as powdered thyme. And that's an interesting way to look at it, because I think I mentioned it before that I've heard an argument. It's not a popular one, but I've heard this argument that gelatin can kind of expedite the aging process. And on some level, that maybe, I can see how people might think that's a bad thing for beers like IPA and Pale Ale. We haven't been able to prove that, and perhaps we should test that out. Compare gelatin fined IPA that's been aged for 2 months or something like that to a non-fined one. But in other styles, such as lagers or big barley wines or beers that are maybe expected to have a little bit of age on them, and by lagers, I'm just talking about the lagering step. You lager a beer for 3 or 4 weeks before you start drinking it. Perhaps gelatin will help make that beer ready sooner. And that has been my own anecdotal experience. I've come to accept that I just prefer fresh lager beer, and by being able to fine with gelatin and drop that beer clear sooner, I'm able to start drinking it when it tastes fresh, when it tastes better to me. Jake, what are your thoughts?
I've used gelatin a lot. It works really well. I don't think I mean, you look at all these experiments, you look at the pictures, I mean, it definitely works. There are some styles that maybe it doesn't work as well in. We haven't tried this in a Hefeweizen. I don't think I've ever tried it in a Hefeweizen, but I've used it. I adopted it as a pretty normal part of my process. Lately, I've been using floating dip tubes in kind of going away from gelatin just as I test those out. But I'd recommend gelatin to anyone. I have no qualms about using it in any beer, and I'll probably continue to do that.
Yeah. And you're referring to the Clear Beer draft system. If you guys want to check that stuff out, we've been chatting with the dude who runs that business, and everyone we've talked to who uses these Clear Beer draft system things seems to love them. I don't have any yet, but I'm definitely interested in trying them out. But for me, gelatin, I mean, it's the way to go. I found that the only reason I don't use gelatin on certain beers is because and I'll admit it, like I'm afraid of the blowback we'll get from readers who think that the gelatin somehow had an impact on the results of whatever experiment it is that we're performing. That's not specifically related to gelatin, but otherwise, I'm using gelatin in pretty much every beer I make, with the exception of New England IPA. I'm trying to leave it out of those because they're supposed to be hazy. But yeah, I'm a fan. And unless you're a vegetarian or a vegan, and if you like clear beer, by all means, man, pick up some gelatin for like $12-$13. You can get a whole tub of the stuff. And then, for each 5-gallon batch, you're just scooping out a half a teaspoon and blending it with a quarter cup of boiled water. Works great.
Yeah, the gelatin I purchased has long since expired, and it's still lasting me to use in beer.
Well, and that's a good point. It will. I mean, we brew a lot. I mean, I think we brew more than the average home brewer. And I've got packets of gelatin that I bought, no joke, 4.5 years ago, and it still works just fine. I mean, it's just collagen. You can boil it, you can store it forever. It works really well. Well, that is all we've got on gelatin. Thanks for listening. If you want to read more about the experiments we discussed in this show or any of the other stuff we're up to, you can head over to brewlosophy.com. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
Hello. So you stuck around because you either noticed that this episode was a little bit longer than normal, or
you couldn't figure out how to turn it off.
Or you couldn't figure out how to turn your podcasting off. Well, I'm sitting here with my good friend, Tim. Jersey, unfortunately, has to work right now. But Tim, what's up, dude?
Not much, Marshall. Just drinking some of your fine beer.
Some of my fine beers. We've been drinking beer for the last hour or so. And I just finished editing this episode that you just finished listening to, within which is contained the review of Flying Mouflon by Trogs, which is a beer that Tim really enjoyed. What, about 2.5 months ago, something like that? I think we recorded that that series of reviews back in, what was it,
January?
Like January 1st, 2nd week of January, something like that. Well, that was the one that was a beer that I actually really enjoyed. And
not so much.
Tim, not so much. Tim and Jersey, neither of you guys really seem to like that beer. I know you don't really remember it. It's difficult to remember the nights that we actually do end up recording, for various reasons, of course. But I feel like it was only right for me to share this next piece. You see, after we recorded that review, Jersey and Tim couldn't believe when I told them that I enjoyed the beer. They couldn't believe that I actually liked it. So they set me down for a review, and I forgot to turn the recorder off. So
it happens.
It happens from time to time. Usually it gets you into trouble. I feel like this one might be We might finally make it, Timmy Tim. We might finally make it. This is going to be the review of reviews. They kind of interviewed me about this beer, and we went on for what looks like to be about 5 minutes. So you get a little bit of a bonus in this episode. So hey,
call it what you will.
Call it what you will. Here you go.
1 minute beer review.
Take my hand. Anyway, this is a request from Tim and I, because as soon as we drank that beer, Marshall was like, dude, I love it so much.
So we had to hear why.
We would like to hear from
Someone who knows what they're talking about.
From a real learned man.
From a professional homebrewer.
That's right. From a real learned man.
This beer is very
Tastes
good.
like balls.
There is kind of a sweaty thing to it. But that's not bad. I mean,
It's definitely not good.
no, what it smells like. So I have a good friend, Matt Human, who lives a couple, 15, 20 minutes from here, who has a barley wine. Do you guys know what barley wine is?
Don't make us look like fools.
Okay,
Just
that's
tell
a dumb
your story.
question. That was a dumb question.
Yeah.
Barley wine.
Yeah, I know it. Fuck. You know what
Barley wine is basically what it sounds. It's really, it's just a big beer that's really high in alcohol, high enough to where it's kind of outside the beer range, more into the wine range. So this is about 12%. I think it's 11.7% alcohol. This beer smells delectable.
Dude, what is... Friends. No, man. You're too fancy for your own good.
Oh, no, it smells like
There is-
toast with a little bit of like a...
How about this?
Did you say toes?
It
toast.
does taste like toes. It tastes like toes.
It has a
After running
toast. And
marathon
it has a
toes.
toast. But in a good way. It's like toes that taste good.
You like the taste of toast. How about this?
Some toast.
If I were to go to Costco and get 100 people, the percentage of people that would say this is good would be like what? 4, 5%?
Why Costco?
Because normal Americans. That's what me and Tim are. You're an elitist hoity-toity who understands, like, there was, a nice strain of yeast on this one, but we don't understand that, dude.
But, okay, so if you were to take the percentage of people at Costco who would like this,
Where's the ham?
like hams.
Oh, dude, it just
beer.
smells different and terrible.
Well, it's different. You've never had it. It's unique. But if you developed an appreciation, if your palates weren't so juvenile.
I think I quit drinking.
He just called our palates juvenile.
If you learn to like it, Tim, you think you can drink it?
No, I just think I quit drinking.
Timmy,
You'd quit drinking.
Timmy,
This was all there
if
was.
this is high level shit, then I'm happy with my juvenile palate. Hashtag juvenile palate. Bam. Hashtag juvenile palate, baby.
Miller Lite.
Yeah, I'll take a Coors Light over this any day, dude.
Listen.
It's just terrible.
It's not. This is just a different style. It's like people who don't like IPA compared to Pilsner.
But
this is just a different beer style.
I agree with you 100%, benefactor.
I would
However,
drink a lot of
I
IPA.
would contend that out of a group of 100 people from anywhere in Fresno County or anywhere, you're going to get about 5 to 6 people out of that 100 that think this is delicious.
Well, I think if you condense those 100 people down to people who enjoy beer in general, I think a lot of people would like this, dude. It's pretty
I will
solid.
bet you $100, Jersey versus Brewlosophy, that we go out and give this to 100 people and 5, maybe 6 will like it. I'll give you 6.
I'd make the bet, but to be fair, this is Troeg's Flying Mouflon.
Flying Muff?
Mouflon? Flying Mufflin? I actually don't know.
It's like that karate shit.
I'm
So we
surprised I
can't
don't
do
like
it.
it.
The House of Flying Muff, dude. I was there once in China.
We can't do that bet because this is impossible to get where we live. That's what makes it even more special.
Timmy,
I'm
maybe
glad
maybe
we can't get it.
Maybe we're just two abnormal people, but I want to like it because I know that you know what
So
you're talking
what don't
about.
you like about it? So
It smells like trash. When you smell it,
Pretty much everything.
you're like, oh my god, it smells like trash. And then you drink it, and it's just like 17 different flavors of terribleness.
It's just
I
not
get
good.
I get a really good malt. Like when you open when we're brewing out there, and I open up my malt bin to measure out the malt.
Oh god, it's awful. It's
Dude,
just awful.
I will tell you, the first drink I took, like I almost lost my cookies. Now I'm kind of warming up to
It
it.
kind of
but
tastes like cookies. I mean, that's kind of the thing.
I'm kind of warming up to it, but only because I know you like it, so it must be good. Like my brain is telling me,
trying.
like you're an idiot. Like he knows what he's talking about, but I can't get there, buddy. I love you so much, but I can't get there.
I have that kind of influence on you.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
You've got mind controller. Remember my favorite beer, Fat Tire? And then you told me, I hate that beer. It tastes like biscuits. And now I can't drink it Because every time I drink it, I taste biscuits.
Well, I didn't say I hate it. I said it just tastes like
You
biscuits.
ruined it for me.
Well.
So you're also like, my brain is like, well, Marshall thinks this is a good beer. It must be a good beer. But
I actually really
but
do.
Tim,
I would
I'm
drink,
just
I would
stand
drink a
strong
lot
with
of this
you.
I'm
beer.
standing strong.
I still think this is a big experiment for him to test if we really know what a good beer tastes like or not. He's like, I'm going to say it's good, and they're going to fall for it.
But that presumes you're presuming that I care what you guys think about beer. I don't give a shit.
Well, then what are we doing here? I quit. Timmy, let's quit together.
You can't quit.
I can't quit.
Ah, damn it.
I can't quit you.
I can't quit you.
You had me at beer.